Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. And so happy to have you with us today. And I am sharing with you a second time now my amazing guest, Dirk Yow. And we had so much fun. He shared so much on the first show, and he has so much more to share with us. So I have him here with us again today. And Dirk is an expert in the process of intestinal detoxification. He holds a BS, microbiology, medicinal botany, drugless healing from Evergreen State College in Washington State, and a certificate from Germany in the use of oxygen ozone as it relates to precision intestinal oxidative hydrotoning, PIOH. His book, Wheels of Wellness, is an introduction to the PIOH process and the author's first of many. He is published both nationally and internationally. And Dirk, your book is absolutely amazing. It just shared so much great information. I just absolutely loved it.
Well, thank you, Paula, and thank you for having me again on your podcast. I really appreciate it. And again, having to do with people getting information to help themselves. And we always talk about whatever type of healing that you do, so-called energy medicine. It comes back to if it's really truly effective, ultimately it's going to help the mind, the body, and the spirit. And this is part of this whole milieu of what's out there. And I remember before the internet, before all of this the information that's come out, especially starting in the late 90s and on, how it's cumulatively intensified. And so sometimes it can get quite confusing if you go on the internet, for example, and you Google an herb, or you Google a process or a modality, or something that a person's considering doing for their own health. You'll get, advocates, you'll get people that are against it. And so by the end of the day, you're going, well, what am I going to do? I'm still uncertain. And so in terms of philosophy, and I think we mentioned that a little bit on the first interview, when I wrote this book, Wheels of Wellness, an introduction to PIO ceremony. It's actually a process, and that process that, in terms of drugless healing, and in that philosophy, in the original term from the Greek, physician comes from that philosophy or philosophy of the body. And so in drugless healing, the first of all, that philosophy says don't do drugs, that they're a poison. And sometimes, is it necessary to do a poison? Perhaps. Again, coming back to that philosophy, there's various models out there. And so in my book, I use the model of the medicine wheel. And there's Ayurvedic medicine, there's Chinese medicine, acupuncture, there's other forms new in terms of worldwide. The reason I selected in my studies of drugless healing the medicine wheel, because I thought it portrayed the ideals of what drugless healing is, the philosophy of drugless healing. And so at the center, according to some traditions of Native American traditions, at the center of that wheel, the term medicine means homeostasis or balance. So in other words, you are at the center of that wheel, and you've got north, south, east, west, mind, body, spirit, emotions. And if you are out of balance, if your homeostasis feels disturbed, then you look to those four directions. And then above you have your creator. In other words, we were created with certain attributes. And if we go against those attributes, we can get ourselves into trouble. And so this is where, and a lot of people that I see, I refer to them as seekers, because They're seeking after information. Oftentimes, and again, it's pretty, standard. A person will come in and I'll ask them, among other things, because again, I'm not a doctor, I don't diagnose, I don't prescribe, but what I try to do is help guide that seeker towards learning to listen to their own body. And that gives it a way that's why I like that model in terms of the medicine wheel. So they may come in and it could be an athlete, it can be a bodybuilder, for example. Why are you here? Well, I would like to get bigger muscles. Okay, well, that's good to know. It just so happens that among other things, that PIOH can perhaps help you get bigger muscles. So it doesn't really matter what the goals are and the fact that the person is motivated, whatever that motivation may be. I want to run faster, or it could be someone that's just is health conscious. They want to add to their regimen. Well, I do a fast quarterly. I do juicing. Is there something, would this help me get more out of my cleanse? Absolutely, it can help you. And so once we establish what those goals might be, then that gives us a framework to go on. And again, the ultimate goal, no matter what, is in teaching a person about their own body, to listen to their own body. It's just like the act of digestion. And in the first chapter, I talk about the digestive process. And a lot of us as children were not taught much about our bodies. In my book, I have a number of references, but there's actually a book that was written for middle school children. And they had, for example, a science book, they had a whole chapter about constipation. And no one talks about that now. And I think, when we look at the generations, we've been considerably dumbed down about our bodies. So a good place to start is what's the purpose of what you eat? Is it because you like donuts? Or is it because whatever you put in your mouth, ultimately the act of digestion involves breaking things down into smaller and smaller increments. That's catabolism. And ultimately, some of those elements get recombined, and that is known as anabolism. And so that part, if you understand why you're for example, chewing your food, the act of chewing. So say, for example, it's getting towards lunchtime and you're walking across the street and you smell, an odor from, maybe you like Thai food, and wow, you smell oh man, it's around lunchtime and you feel your mouth is watering. Well, that's a chemical response and it's your salivary glands. And what's interesting about this, that in the lungs, it's been found that you actually have some taste buds in your lungs. And so when you smell that food and your mouth starts watering, that aroma triggers those glands. And you have 6 total glands, and known as the little pancreas, to stimulate salivary production. And in that saliva, you have an enzyme known as ptyalin, and that ptyalin works on specifically simple sugars and carbohydrates. And so it alkalinizes the food. So when you go in and you sit down and you start to eat, so this is where that chemical component gets mixed in by the second key component. And again, all of these things occur all the way down through the entire digestive system. Is that mechanical component starts with the chewing action. So your teeth, your gums, your tongue, you're chewing, you're trying to break that food bolus down. In some of the old books I have, it was called the Physical Health, Physical Movement. There's a man by the name of Dr. Fletcher, and he would say you must Fletcherize your food. And he meant that mastication. The idea is you're chewing the food down as much as you can, as small as possible, mixing it with your saliva, so that when you swallow it, that bolus, it only takes about 8 to 10 seconds for that bolus of food, once you swallow it, to go to your stomach. Now, if that bolus has not been chewed, and if you watch, you'll notice I can't help but watch sometimes when I'm out, at a restaurant, how some people eat. And literally, there's people that they do not chew their food. They chomp it a couple times and swallow it. And the problem with that is that it's like a domino effect. It ultimately affects your digestive process all the way down the line. And some people, because they feel healthy most of the time, they take their health for granted. And sometimes it might take years and years for this, but they literally will start starving to death because they're not chewing their food enough. So sometimes
Wow.
these simple habits
Yeah.
can tear a person's health down. And that's why, as parents or grandparents, any way you can influence your children to slow down. That's why family time, having a meal together with your family, that's something that's not done much anymore either. And there can be emotional issues too. Some people grew up they ate by themselves, or maybe family time was very unpleasant. And so they just didn't want to eat around their family because they'd start fighting, or other families, especially big families. I worked with someone recently from a farming community, and it's like, there's 8 kids in the family. It's mealtime. You sit down, and if you didn't grab you could on that first plate, that was it. So
Yeah.
people just,
Yeah.
so in terms of chewing, that was not helpful. And so habits and habits can be the hardest part of looking at your own, again, listening to your own body. How have I been chewing? And so in terms of how many times do you chew, some people say 30 times. The Chinese said 100 times, certain, in Chinese medicine, but enough that it's a fine mush before you swallow it. And this is true of juicing. If you're making a juice, juicing, whatever that vegetable fruit might be, is you swish it around in your mouth, act like you're chewing it because you're mixing it with the saliva. You're chewing however many, celery sticks or apples or whatever else you get out in your head that, hey, I'm eating, 8 stalks of celery right now, or 8 apples or whatever the number is, but get that in your head that, hey, that saliva needs to mix in with that food. And the other part to that is I'll see people oftentimes who chew gum. And the thing is about gum, and most people don't realize this, and again, you can look at it for yourself. That's the wonderment of the internet now. But I looked at, well, what's gum made out of? Well, quote, artificial latex. And then in the really tiny itty bitty fine print, guess what it says?
What?
Plastic.
No.
Yeah, you're chewing plastic. Now, I saw recently there was an ad for quote natural gum, but still, the thing about it is even they make it out of the gum tree or another plant, and that's definitely preferable to plastic. But again, the problem is if you're chewing gum all day long, you exhaust your salivary glands. So by the time you do get ready to eat, the saliva is not there because you've used it all on a piece of plastic. Is not a
Wow.
good thing. So anyway, that's a couple of habits. Chewing your food enough and stop the gum chewing, or at least alter it, a little bit around your routines. And so then once that 8 to 10 seconds, it goes down to the stomach. The stomach, the food, in terms of processing, again, you got the alkalized bolus triggers in the stomach hydrochloric acid production. And so again, the reason that it's important to have that alkalinized bolus pH wise is that's what triggers your stomach to make hydrochloric acid. And even though it only makes up about 4 to 5% of the total juices that your stomach produces, that the rest of that, the peptides, so forth, does not get triggered without that HCl, hydrochloric acid. And so again, that chemical interaction, the alkalinized bolus triggers the HCl production in the stomach. And so then the food takes about, in terms of peristalsis or the muscle activity, the stomach itself has several sets of muscles. I don't know if I can point this the right
Wow.
direction up
Yes.
here. Anyway, on this chart, you can see the stomach. Can you see that okay? Or
Yes,
okay,
yes.
so the stomach has three sets of muscles, and the food is gurgitated by those muscles for about 2 to 4 hours. And this is where a significant amount of your protein metabolism occurs, and that's where your amino acids are derived. And this is also your calcium, a big part of where your calcium absorption starts. And so those two, and there's other influences as well, but those are two big ones. And so then from about 2 to 4 hours, it goes into the next section of the gut, which is the duodenum, which is about the first foot small intestine. And so that part of it is where the common bile duct is attached. So you've got your pancreatic enzymes, you've got your bile that's produced by the liver, and then you have your gall in your gallbladder, which is a certain amount of bile is stored in that gallbladder, and it changes it chemically into a very characteristic greenish color, and that works more on fats. So you've got your fat metabolism, sugars, so forth. And so then that bolus continues down along that first foot, and it goes into the next section of small intestine, which is called the jejunum. And the jejunum is about roughly 9 feet in length. And again, those muscles, there's two major sets of muscle contractions or mechanical actions in the small intestine. One set holds the food in place while the villi, and these are hair-like structures, they're not hairs, but they're little structures that wave through the food while the bolus is being held in that first set of peristaltic effects. And then that bolus is passed down another inch, held, villi waves through it, held all the way down the line into that next section of small intestine. So things are still being broken down into smaller and smaller increments. And the enzymes and so forth that are produced by the small intestine are added to the rest of the mix. And again, the idea of breaking things down into smaller and smaller increments, because things have to be less than half a micron for the cells to absorb them. So then you go into the next section of small intestine, which is known as the ileum, and that's about 13 feet in length. And so then you've got all the food still being broken down, but then you have more absorption going on that goes into the bloodstream. And then you have in the next section, once the food bolus is broken down further, it goes in through the ileocecal valve, which is the one-way door between the ileum, the distal part of the ileum, or the lower part of the ileum, into the cecum vermiform appendix. And at that point, the food is still, and this is where, again, a lot of misconceptions that are still going on, that the colon is oftentimes referred to as just a sewage pipe. But in actuality, in the Greek, if you go back to the early Greeks, they defined the right side of the colon from the transverse, which is the middle section of the colon, it's the part that starts the cecum vermiform appendix, and it runs up to the hepatic flexure, which is the first bend that's underneath the liver, and you can kind of see the gallbladder sticking out there. Can you see that okay, that greenish?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so that's that they just have the liver lifted up there a little bit, but that's, you can see part of the gallbladder there. But it goes across to the part called the transverse colon that goes from the right to the left, and that's the second major bend is the splenic flexure. That's where the spleen sits just on top of that flexure called the splenic flexure. That second bend, it goes down to the descending sigmoid and the anal canal. And so basically the Greeks define this right section from the cecum to the middle of the transverse as the large intestine, and they referred from the left over to the splenic all the way down to the anal canal as the colon with a K. And why did they do that? Well, again, they must have known something we didn't, because the most recent modern research shows that there's still about 35% of your total absorption going on in metabolism in that right side. And that's mind-boggling, because the colon itself doesn't produce any gastric juices, but what it does do chemically is that it has the microbiome, or the good bacteria that further break down and recombine food. So this is where, for example, serotonin is produced. Serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter, is produced in this area of the large intestine and the liver, and, for example, sent to the brain. And this was discovered back in 1999. A book was published, Dr. Michael Gerson, it was called Your Gut Has a Mind of Its Own. And he did research for pharmaceutical interests, and he was asked to do a study about serotonin. And at that time, and again, you're looking at 1999, at that time, it was thought that serotonin was produced by the brain. So he did a series of experimental research on serotonin. And what he discovered was, oh my gosh, serotonin is not produced in the brain. It's produced in, and again, they would define it as the colon. And he said, oh my gosh, I can't publish this. They're gonna tear it apart. I gotta have more, proof here, evidence. So he went back and he approached two other independent labs, not telling them anything about what he was doing. He said, I need to research serotonin. Could you do a set of experiments and help me with this? Sure. So two different labs, and then he himself redid his, and all three of them came up with the same thing. And so he published the book knowing he would be attacked, because changing the paradigm is very difficult.
Yep.
And so sure enough, as soon as he published, he started getting attacked. And even to this day, if you talk to some older GI specialists, they still don't know that serotonin is produced in the gut. And so this is how long it takes. Now, I did see a gastrointestinal study book that was published. I think it was 2006, I think. I'd have to go back and look. But they did have the gut-brain axis. They did talk about that. So over that many years, the paradigm has shifted, but it takes a lot to shift it. But yet the early Greeks, some of these other earlier civilizations seem to know more about our health, our gut health, than we seem to know now.
This is so fascinating, Dirk.
Yeah, so it is.
A quick question with this.
Yes.
When we're doing our meals and for all this process, how important is water? To get enough water, and do we want to drink a lot of water when we eat, or is it better around the meals?
Okay, that's a very great question. And so there's different parts to it. Okay, and it comes back to what is it that you eat normally? Now, if someone is eating, for example, if they eat, a significant amount of salads, or they have moisture in their food itself, you're going to get some water that way. And now the average, statistic, or the ratio is you take your body weight. And if you say, for example, someone weighs 150 pounds, divide it in half, that's 75 pounds. So for every pound, you equal 1 ounce of water. Now that, and again, we've heard these statistics for years and years. It starts to become white noise. So then you start, okay, I've had people line up, okay, I'm 150, I'm going to line up my 75 ounces and drink it all in the morning. They chug, 6 or 8 glasses. First thing, I got it, I'm Jack, I did that. Well, the problem with that is that it might be too much right away. And so what's going to happen? A lot of it, you may urinate out, so forth. So for example, if you're an athlete, or you do saunas, or you do other types of activity where you sweat, you may need a little more water than that. Also, what is your diet like? If you're eating a lot of concentrated foods, refined foods, you're going to tend to be more dehydrated because of that. So, because one of the reasons you need water is to make your digestive juices. So then you look at timing. And it's like we were talking about the whole gum thing earlier. In order for your salivary glands to make saliva, they also need water. Now, there's different ways to do this, and one is the temperature. And I know some people do like to drink cold water, but every time you drink a cold glass of water, it shocks your stomach. So it tends to shut the stomach down. So the ideal would be to drink mostly room temperature water, and ideally, the more purified, the better. And that's a whole nother controversy in and of itself.
Oh,
Some people will, for example, there's a big advocacy to drink alkalinized water. Well, the problem with that is that if you drink that all the time, guess what it's going to do to your stomach acid? It's going to
mhm.
neutralize it. So then when you get ready to eat, you won't have that HCl because of the pH of the water. So, maybe time it where you're drinking neutral pH water, and then drink a glass of alkaline water this time of day. Try to drink it away from your food, but still go back to mostly, the ideal is mostly
Oh,
neutral pH.
I
So
love it.
that would be
Oh,
that part of
Dirk.
it as well.
Oh,
And then yes, and then how much water. Now some people have a very difficult time, especially people who weigh a lot, like some of the bodybuilders or some people that come in to
yeah.
see me. One of their goals is to lose some weight. It's not uncommon for me to see people that are 200 pounds or more. Well, what does that mean? That means they need to at least drink 100 ounces, which is almost a gallon of water a day.
Wow.
So how can I drink all that water? Well, one way to do it is every half hour, take a mouthful of water, about an ounce of water, swish it around, and for about 20 seconds before you swallow it. And what that
Oh,
does is that some of the water gets into your system sublingually so that it goes to other places besides just straight to your bladder. So
oh
there's
my
ways you
God.
drink it and how you drink it. And one of the things I always tell people is bless your water. Did you know that water is programmable? One of the things, and it was a Japanese
Um,
researcher. I wish
yeah.
I could, pardon me?
I've rakied my water before, but
Okay,
honey,
yeah.
we have like uh just less than a minute left to go. It went by
Oh
so
my
fast.
gosh. Oh
Yeah,
my gosh.
tell
So,
everyone how they can learn more about you and
yeah,
yeah,
well, when I'm sure you'll do this
we're gonna have to talk
well,
more.
if you could link this on the website is on your podcast, maybe, is how to get one of my books.
Okay.
And you just order it directly through me. And there's three versions. There's the which it's my favorite is the
Yes.
spiral version. There's a soft cover and there's a hard cover. Uh, uh, so
And
I
what
would
is your
suggest
website, Dirk?
the website would be through this young gentleman that I trained. He has a Pio Institute in South Carolina. You can see his
And
code is right there at the bottom of the book. I don't know if
okay,
you can, if
perfect.
people want to take a picture of that, that will take them right to his
Perfect.
website. I currently
Oh,
don't have a website
and
right now. One of the reasons
okay.
I moved out here to where I'm at is to get away
Everybody
from all
check
that
out
noise.
Wheels of Wellness. And I
What's
hate
that?
to say
Yes.
goodbye, but I'm afraid we have to.
All
Oh,
right. I
thank you
appreciate it.
so
Thank
much.
you very much, Paula.
Oh, so wonderful. Love, hugs, and blessings.